It's the first day of June 2020, which marks the end of meteorological spring. And what a spring it's been. A spring like no other, because for the last 10 weeks, humankind in England has been in a state that's been called lockdown. However, whilst we might have largely been confined to our homes with trips beyond our front doors or garden gates restricted to essential journeys only, our wildlife has been carrying on as normal. Having said that, the reports are that wildlife has indeed been affected, but in a positive way. Whilst we've been restricted in our movements, the natural world has been taking advantage of our absence. I usually notice an increased level of wildlife activity in the garden from about early March. The early blossoming trees and shrubs bring the bees back to life along with other less visible insects. In turn, this increases the level of activity in our garden birds. This year, because of lockdown, I've been at home a lot more and have thus noticed various comings and goings much more. The good weather in March and April has helped because I've also been outside rather more. In particular, I've noticed something has been digging quite large holes in our borders and in our pots. Despite my extended presence at home, I couldn't identify the culprit. So I decided to keep watch to find out what's been digging and flinging our mulch around. I decided to construct a hide in order that I could keep watch and to set up a camera station to record the results. I didn't want to spend any money on this since I figured it would only be a temporary thing. I found a discarded garden furniture tarpaulin that we'd left out for the rubbish tip and an old sun parasol in the shed and used these to set about constructing the hide. Pretty quickly I discovered that leaving a slot for the camera and for me to see out also allowed the birds to see in. Plus, where I'd located the hide against the house, there was a white wall behind that showed up every movement that I made. I decided to bite the bullet and invest the princely sum of £15 in a cheap camouflage net, aimed mainly for children's den building rather than for serious life or death camouflage purposes. After several design iterations, I settled on a combination of black plastic bin bags, garden chairs, the parasol and the camouflage netting, and set up the camera with a couple of microphones out in the field as it were, and lay in wait to catch the culprits red-handed, or red-pawed, or red-beaked. Anyone who has embarked on any kind of bird watching, known as twitching to those who are really serious about it, will know that involved is a serious amount of sitting around waiting, and waiting, and waiting. More waiting, followed by some waiting. Inevitably, the first to put in an appearance is Essex's cleanest robin. I'd already noticed the robins were the most frequent users of the bath, rarely showing an interest in the food, but bath time would be 3 or more times a day, and that's only in the period that I might typically be up and about myself. After a tad more waiting, next up was a blue tit, this one looking decidedly raggedy around the feathers. My first thought was that parenthood was taking its toll on this poor creature, and having looked it up since, it seems that it's partly it. The female blue tit will pull feathers out from its body to line the nest once the eggs are laid, and also to help transfer body heat. Studies also show that in the southern region, the annual moult for blue tits can start in late March before any of the chicks have fledged. Later the following week, I was fortunate enough to spot this little fella having an early feed yourself lesson. clearly struggling a bit with a mealworm left on the wall. You can see he's holding it down with one foot whilst having a go at it with his beak. He'll go far, that one. Although a common enough visitor, especially under the hanging feeders that we have further down the garden, we don't normally see wood pigeons so near the house. However, attracted by the water and the food on the wall, these have become emboldened. Uniquely, wood pigeons drink using their beaks like a straw, where garden birds will typically drink by throwing their heads back. These must be the world's clumsiest birds. They are the ones who stand in the bowl whilst trying to eat out of it, tip the water up and crash land into the side of the wall. They look a bit like an Aardman character, I always think. We quite often hear the magpie's distinctive chattering type call, but up until this time hadn't really seen any in the garden. Suddenly, quite early one morning, I saw this one come down and bosh attacked my lav mic that I'd hidden in the foliage. Obviously not that well hidden. I went to check straight after to find that half of my windshield was missing and nowhere to be found. Due to the limit of my patience and the fact that other things needed tending to, like my marriage relationship, I couldn't spend the whole time outside in the hide. Blowing the budget completely, I purchased and set up a trail camera to monitor the goings-on when I wasn't there, especially at night. Even I'm not that keen or patient. Eagerly checking on said camera for the first few mornings, I found that disappointingly little goes on at night other than the occasional passing cat. Then on the third morning I found a new overnight visitor. Judging by the large eyes and ears and its nocturnal appearances, this is most likely to be a wood mouse. By pure chance I did go out after dark one evening quite late to fill up the water bowl ready for the next morning's early filming. I was taken completely aback to discover that under the cover of darkness and undetected by the heat and motion detector on the trail camera, there was a complete pool party going on. Seemingly the most alert and the most timid are the blackbirds. One slight rustle or movement visible through the camouflage net and they are off. I managed to get several bits of footage of them feeding and drinking, but one false move from me and they would hop it. They are also the early risers of the bird world, exponents of the early bird catches the worm proverb. Generally I caught these on the trail cam rather than when I was sitting out, even though I was out and ready by 5 AM on some days. Except on this one occasion when a juvenile quite suddenly flew straight in for a drink. Unfortunately the bath is just too small for these birds to bathe in. Something to think about for next year. Beyond our back fence is a bridle path, and this forms a wildlife corridor that extends across the back of all the gardens in our neighbourhood. There are very mature trees and hedges bordering this that were there long before our house was built. Inevitably squirrels are regular visitors, again not usually coming very close to the house. Our squirrels are members of the Essex Squirrel Acrobatic Society and generally enjoy taking their meals as part of circus practice. My initial thought was that these were the guilty party responsible for digging out our pots and flinging the contents all over. Though generally they are rather more tidy in their habits and will dig quite precise holes to bury or dig up their food hoards, even patting it back down afterwards. So who are the culprits? Eventually, after many hours spent sitting outside, it was the trail camera that caught the culprits in the act. Yep, it's official. Blackbirds are the bird world's greatest vandals. Not only are they turning over the topping to get at grubs and insects lurking below, it seems to be making ideal nest lining material as they're taking it away by the beakful. So after several weeks of watching, the culprits have been identified and banged to rights. But in the process I've learned a huge amount about what goes on in my own back garden. How even in a relatively small town garden there's an ecosystem where water is as valuable a resource as food. I've learned that the wild world can adapt to live in our world in spite of our interference, and sometimes because of it. I've learned that it's not only the pretty things in nature that are important, but some of the less attractive things are all an equal part of the circle of life, and I shall be making changes in the garden to make more space for them and to encourage a wider diversity of habitat. The hide might only be temporary, but my interest, now piqued by this experience, is not, and I believe that others who have been kept at home like myself have been affected similarly. Let's hope so, and that we can continue to make more space for the wild world.